Hello and welcome to LSAT Logic Applied. I'm your host, Andrew Leahy, an assistant teaching professor of law at Drexel Klein School of Law. This is a short format podcast where I take the tools from LSAT logical reasoning, assumptions, flaws, causation, strength and weaken, and apply them to real-world claims in the news, science, and public discourse. For those that don't know, the LSAT is the law school admission test, a standardized exam designed to assess logical reasoning, analytical thinking, and reading comprehension for law school applicants. It's a high-stakes test with a unique focus on how arguments work and how they fall apart. The LSAT is owned and administered by the Law School Admission Council, or LSAC. I don't claim any affiliation or ownership. I'm just here to teach the logic. And you don't need to be studying for the LSAT to follow along. The point is to learn how to spot weak or incomplete reasoning in everyday life, the same kind of reasoning the LSAT trains you to attack under time pressure. Today's episode is about a deceptively powerful LSAT skill, identifying a necessary assumption, the unstated idea an argument must rely on to work at all. The story we're looking at today isn't politics or advertising. It's academic research that's already being summarized in headline-friendly ways. A newly accepted paper in the Journal of Studies on Alcohol and Drugs is titled, "Lifetime Cannabis Use is Associated with Brain Volume and Cognitive Function in Middle-Aged and Older Adults." The authors analyzed data from the UK Biobank, looking at more than 500,000 adults between the ages of 40 and 70. They report that people who used cannabis at some point in their lives tended to have larger brain volumes in certain regions and perform better on measures like learning speed and short-term memory. That finding has already been summarized in language like, quote, "Cannabis use tied to larger brain, better cognition in older adults." And that's where the logic problem begins, because this isn't just a description of data. It's being treated implicitly as an explanation, and explanations always rest on assumptions, which makes this the perfect LSAT teaching tool. So let's break this down LSAT style. First, what is the conclusion people are being invited to accept? Stripped of the scientific caveats, it sounds something like this. Cannabis use may have beneficial or even protective effects on brain health and cognition in older adults. Now, what are the premises supporting that conclusion? First, lifetime cannabis use is associated with larger brain volume in CB1-rich regions. Second, cannabis users perform better on certain cognitive tests. Third, these associations are observed even when use was limited to adolescents. And fourth, the effects appear in middle-aged and older adults. Put together, the reasoning looks something like this. People who used cannabis tend to have larger brain volumes and better cognitive performance later in life. Therefore, cannabis use may contribute to healthier brain aging. That is a classic move from association to implied explanation. And on the LSAT, that tells us exactly what to look for. So let's look at this with an LSAT lens. This is a necessary assumption question. On the LSAT, it would sound something like this. Which of the following is an assumption required by the argument? A necessary assumption is something the argument must believe, even if it never says it out loud. If that assumption is false, then the argument collapses. Here, the argument depends on an assumption like this. The observed association is not primarily driven by reverse causation or unmeasured confounding factors. Why does the argument need that? Because if people with healthier brains, higher education levels, or more stable life circumstances are simply more likely both to use cannabis and to score well cognitively decades later, then cannabis itself isn't doing the causal work. The data would still be real, the association would still exist, but the explanation would fail. The conclusion quietly assumes the direction of influence, and that assumption is never proven. Put simply, they might have the causal arrows reversed. This is where LSAT logic gets sharp. Notice what the study, and especially the summaries, do not give us. No causal evidence, no randomized exposure, no way to rule out selection effects or survivorship bias, no proof that larger brain volume here is functionally beneficial rather than compensatory. To be clear, the authors themselves are careful. They explicitly say causality cannot be inferred. But the moment readers walk away thinking cannabis helps preserve the aging brain, the argument has crossed a logical line. On the LSAT, a correct necessary assumption answer often feels modest. It doesn't add new facts, it just holds the argument together. If we negate the assumption, if the association is mostly explained by pre-existing differences, the argument's explanatory force disappears. And that's how you know you found it. And this is why necessary assumptions are such a powerful LSAT skill. In the real world, arguments rarely announce their assumptions. Scientific findings, press summaries, and headlines often slide from what was observed to what it must mean. The LSAT trains you to interrupt that slide with a disciplined question. What has to be true for this explanation to work at all? Once you start asking that question, research summaries, policy claims, and health headlines all start to look very different. Thanks for listening to LSAT Logic Applied. If you enjoyed this breakdown, subscribe for more short episodes where we apply clean logic to messy real-world claims. See you next time.